Hi guys, it's Sophia from ATA Notes, and today I'm presenting the HSC Modern History lecture. So this is all a part of our April lecture series from ATA Notes. We've got heaps of free resources that you can access on our website, atanotes.com, from hundreds of downloadable study notes. We've got lectures running across all this week, but also every single school holiday period. We've got our online discussion page where you can ask Q&A, and there's heaps of questions up on there. There's engaging online revision videos, our newsletter, everyone's favorite, the ATAR calculator. We've got study strategy articles and tips, HSC, uni, all of that, and then heaps more on our website, so definitely check it out. I'll let you guys know a little bit about me. Now, some of you guys might have come to the modern lecture or some of the other lectures in our January series or from year 11. Others might have seen me on the ATAR TikTok. I am the new content creator, but if not, my name's Sophia. I graduated in 2021 with a 96.3 ATAR. These are some of my marks. And at the moment, I'm studying a Bachelor of Education at the University of Sydney to become an English and Business Studies high school teacher. And I was very close. Usually, a lot of English teachers do history, and I was very close to teaching and choosing history as a second subject. But I steered away from it only because I'm a fan-ish of modern history, but because there's so many topics and so many different selection points, I was just more interested in business. I'm sorry if I've got modern lovers in here, but yeah, that's a little bit about me. Otherwise, I'm a massive Swiftie. The breakup news happened over the weekend. I don't want to talk about it, but if there's any Swifties watching, leave me a comment and just confirm to me that it's not real, because I don't believe it's real. I don't believe anything. But yeah, I'm going to be in the live chat, so we'll have a chat, guys, and we're going to have a nice 2 hours now. I want to tell you guys a little bit about this lecture before we get moving on. So the first half of this lecture is skills based, and it's relevant to all case studies. So no matter what topic you're doing, no matter what case, it's going to apply to everyone. It's mainly for skills across the short answer section, which you guys are all going to do in the core, but also skills for the essays and just general essay skills for modern history, because modern history essays are very different to other types of essays that you'll write across different HSC subjects. But I'm also going to talk about studying for modern, because no one's really taught how to do that, and there's all this different advice online that you can find. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about what was working for me and different skills that my friends and I were using. And then in our section 2, we're going to look more at Russia, which is one of the most popular case studies. So it's up to you if you want to stick around for that. Again, the slides are downloadable, so if you go below the live chat section, there should be a resources button. You can click that and download these slides to have access to all of them. You don't have to stay for all of it. This is all recorded. So even if you have to leave halfway through, or you're getting tired, I don't know, this lecture's recorded, so you guys can come back to it, no issues. But yeah, the first section and most of this lecture is going to be dedicated to study and skills across all of it. It's really only the last bit that I'm just going to do a quick intro for our students that are doing Russia. So yeah, the second half is on Russia and the Soviet Union national studies. So if you're not studying it, you can leave. But in saying that, Stalin's dictatorship is a dot point of the course study that everyone's going to be doing. It's part of that when you look at Italy, Japan, and Russia as dictatorships. So there's going to be information in that introduction, because we're not going through the whole Russia topic. That's crazy in 2 hours, especially just in that section. But there'll be some of the really base core points that you guys can use for that topic too. So again, up to you if you want to stay. You can download the slides, you can leave, come back to it if you want. All that. It is all good, guys. Let's talk about surviving modern history, because I think modern history, and I don't care to say it, like other people are going to be like, oh no, and anytime I've said this, they're like, oh, what about maths, what about physics, what about chem? And I'm not sitting here saying modern history is the hardest HSC subject, but I think it is one of the hardest HSC subjects, and not specifically in terms of content and that like the content is super, super hard. The content is hard, it is heavy, and there's obviously so much that makes it hard. But a lot of people are like, oh, the content is just stories, it's just memorizing stories from the past. It's literally not. I made a TikTok about the modern history exam, because the way that it's structured, you're literally doing 50 marks of short answer and then 2 25-mark essays on like literally 4 dot points out of how many in the national case study in the other topic too. So I just think that the modern history exam is one of the hardest assessed HSC exams. There's obviously no multiple choice. And it's just straight writing, straight facts, straight detail across a huge syllabus. So personally, I think modern history is one of the hardest. It's definitely one of the most content heavy subjects, and I think without a doubt it is one of the hardest humanities subjects personally. So I don't know. I haven't met many people that love modern history, and when I was doing it, I wasn't the biggest fan because it's very easy to drown in it. I feel like you miss one lesson of modern history and you feel like you're a term behind, only because of how the syllabus is structured as well. So let me be honest with you. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like modern is so easy to just smash out and such a light subject to study for. It's literally not. And that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about studying for it, and getting through it. So this is just a reminder before we begin that modern is hard. Do not let anyone tell you that it's not. Anytime that I've complained about modern, I'm just hit with the, oh, like, what about extension one math? Oh, what about physics? And the science subjects. But I feel like battling like the math science subjects against like such a heavy like content subject, not a fair battle, not a fair battle. They're very different subjects, but just the nature of the actual HSC exam as well and how modern is assessed, really hard, really hard. But the scaling is really good for it. It's one of the top scaling humanities subjects, so trust that that's going to pull you through. And there's obviously ways to get around all the content, and there's smarter ways that you can study, rather than studying super hard. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I just wanted to put that out there because when I was doing modern, I don't know, like all my class would complain, and we'd all be like, oh, modern's so hard, modern's so hard. But I wouldn't, like, whenever I heard past achievers talking about modern, I just never heard anyone like speak about it in like and confirm that it was hard or that it was difficult. It was just kind of talked about very conversationally. I'm like, but modern is so hard. So I just want to confirm that to all of you guys that it is a hard subject, but scaling will help you. And if you're studying in a smart way, you're going to finesse it. You're going to finesse it. So these are some of my tips. So staying on top of content is so important. It's one thing to say it and then one thing to do it. But modern history is so notoriously known for having like such high amounts of content. So you want to make sure you stay on top of your work. And I swear, like, you fall behind on one lesson or you don't do your notes one time and suddenly you're super behind. So I really recommend staying on top of it as much as you can. If you're away one lesson, ask your friend and pray that your friend keeps up on their notes. But ask your friend, go up to your teacher, ask what was done. Try to go out of your way to stay up on content. Because a lot of the content connects to, and then it goes back to this point, and then sometimes in the essay questions they'll connect two dot points together, and you don't want to miss it. You don't want to fall behind on anything. Everything really intertwines nicely in modern. I feel like within the syllabus, like each point is building off each other. So staying on top of content is so important. You guys do have school holidays now, and trust, I'm not one to be like study every second, 6 hour study days, all holidays. No, I didn't even do that. But I think that the holidays are a good time to just go back over some dot points and try to just, it's not even necessarily, I don't even advise these holidays like trying to get ahead on any work. Just try to make sure you're up to date and you're at where your class is, because that's a good pace to move at. Now, so we had to say for modern, the main study method is notes, I think. And the general consensus is that notes for modern is the main study method. And I think that's such a good base study method, but I just don't personally recommend it stopping there. I think stopping at notes is dangerous because, again, the way that the HSC is assessed and the way that your trials is going to be as well, you're going to get 50 marks a short answer and then 50 marks worth of essays. So you want to make sure that your study method isn't just notes and learning notes, because you're learning all this content, but you don't actually get to practice applying it. And yeah, I had friends who had heaps of notes, like 30-40 pages of notes for all these different topics, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have even more than that. If you just stop at those notes and all you've done is study those and you haven't practiced applying them, you're not gonna find that it's showing up as much in your marks as it would if you were practicing applying them too. So of course, you guys aren't at a point now where you can do a full pass paper, because I'm not sure, especially like only having like being halfway through now, that any of you guys in class would have finished the entire syllabus like content yet. So in terms of like doing a full past paper, a lot of advice you'll find online is start doing past papers, don't do a full past paper until you've finished all the content. So don't worry about past papers now. If anything, you can worry about past paper sections. So I'm sure a lot of you guys would have already finished the course study, and that's where you can sit down and just set a 45-minute timer and do like that first section. Or if you guys have finished your national study, you can start looking at like writing practice essays and like drafting out essays. But otherwise, writing a full past paper now is just a bit much. I think that I don't even know how you would do it if you haven't finished the content. So definitely try to ignore advice coming at this point this early in the year. Definitely as you get closer to trials and as you finish more and more content. But if you guys have not finished all the content yet, don't push yourself with past papers, and also do not push yourself with past papers and practice questions if you don't feel confident with your notes. You want to start, and I mean this across different subjects as well. What's the point of doing practice questions if you're doing the questions and you've got no clue how to answer them? Feel more confident with your notes and the content first. Teach yourself that first. And then when you get confident with that, and when you start to feel like, okay, I feel like I could answer a question to this, then go and practice with a past practice question. Now, I know other people are literally going to say the opposite, and they're going to be like, do practice questions first, find out what you know and you don't. But I feel like you can make more use out of your practice questions when you already go in confident, rather than going in, you've just typed all these notes and then you're just going to do practice questions. Because let's be realistic, lots of us are writing notes in different ways. You can write notes and you can craft your own notes and sit there in full focus, and you're actually studying while you're writing those notes, and you're learning it and teaching it while you're writing those notes. And others are studying with Spotify on, copying the textbook, copy and pasting stuff from work, like from other notes, like putting all different stuff together. And there's no issue with either. It's not even like that's bad. Like I was doing that all the time. I had my like study playlist. I was on it. I would have Netflix on in the background sometimes, typing notes. Like I'm not even gonna lie. Sometimes notes gets really draggy, especially when you do a lot of content subjects. And for modern history, there's so many topics, so many points, like it gets hard to always be 100% switched on with notes. But that's why I feel like you can't 100% rely on notes at the same time. So I think write your notes, even if you write them and you're just kind of chilling out, like it's very like light studying, you're just kind of typing them up. Like sometimes I'd like, even in my free period, sometimes I'd be like typing notes like with my friends, and we'd all be talking, or I'd be on FaceTime like at home typing up my notes. Like notes are one of those things where you can decide how much focus you want to have, but in the end you'll have the same product, at least in the notes, not in terms of your knowledge of them, but you'll have the same product in the notes. So I feel like having notes as a base, that's why it's important, but it's also why you should go to the next step of past practice questions, and then for essays, essay plans and responses. So these are the 3 study methods that I recommend. For now, guys, stay on top of your notes, and I think these holidays is a good time to catch up on notes. If you're not feeling keen to study and you're not feeling motivated, do not feel bad. That is so normal, and you guys need a break. So if you're not feeling too motivated, I think just do some light notes, like have your Spotify on, FaceTime your friends, have a show on the background, and literally just type the notes. Even if they're just typed and they're done, you can always come back to them and study them later. But just having them done and having that step and having that base, I think, is so important. And then a lot of the times, even if you aren't feeling motivated so far in the holidays, and again, the holidays, like you guys, it's like still in week 1, so it's completely fine if you haven't done any work yet, or you're not planning to do it in the next couple of days. That's completely fine. But I feel like what was working for me when I wasn't feeling motivated, if I started with note taking, especially for modern, but I did really light note taking, music on in the background, just like an hour or 2 of just like typing whatever. That really helped me then build into some heavier study where I could get into learning those notes, into memorizing, into flashcards, and into those other techniques. So I feel like notes is a really good place to start. And if you're not feeling too keen with modern, because it's so easy to lose motivation in modern, just start light and don't let anyone talk you out of that. I really don't like some of the advice that goes on online about studying and note taking, and just the mentality you have to have with studying, because it's a lot easier said than done. And I think everyone studies differently. Everyone has different levels of discipline, structure, and motivation. And there's nothing wrong with being super disciplined and being able to wake up at 5 a.m. and do 6 hours of study a day. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's amazing. Like, I have a lot of respect and value towards people that can do that, but I couldn't do that. And I'm sure quite a few of you watching that can't do that, or like are seriously just not bothered to do that. And that's completely fine. And just because you're not bothered to do that doesn't mean that you can't get a band 6 in modern, and doesn't mean that you can't get a 90 plus ATAR, 95 plus ATAR. There's no one way of studying, but I feel like a lot of advice online that you can find across the Facebook discussion group chat, they can see on TikTok, they can see on YouTube, that you can read on articles. I just feel like the general consensus is that you need to be doing this amount of study every single day and this amount of work and this way to study. And there's just very much that ideal year 12 way to study. So me saying this doesn't even just apply to modern, it's just in general in HSC. I think comparison is very difficult to deal with. So try to block it out as much as you can, and trust me, studying and trusting what works for you is so much better than pushing yourself to study in a way that isn't you and isn't how you work. Studying to your learning style is so important, and just going at your own pace, and also, you know, keeping on top of your mental health and staying mentally okay is so important during year 12, because you can be like pushing yourself and mentally in distraught, and that's not the outcome we want, guys. So don't listen too much to any of that. Do what works for you. Even if it's light study at this point, just getting some work done is good. Start with base notes. If you guys start with that, then for short answers, I think the best hands down way to practice is past practice questions. And for essays, it's got to be essay plans and responses. I'll explain both of them. The only reason I say these two study methods is because I very much believe in studying for the exam. You're going to be assessed in trials and HSC the exact same way, with 50 marks of practice short answer questions, and then 2 25-mark essays. So it just, for me at least, it only makes sense to study in those two ways and to study for the exam. And I recommend that for other subjects as well. Study the way that the exam is structured to put it into practice. So for short answer, past practice questions are really good sources of practice. Now, the modern history exam was changed in 2019, I'm pretty sure, the new syllabus. So there's quite a few practice questions and past papers that you can find from past HSC exams, but there's also trial questions that you can find online from trial papers, and then a lot of practice questions that you can find just on Google if you search like modern history core practice questions. Online, you can find a lot online to do practice with, and also different textbooks have practice questions and source practice as well. Even if you don't necessarily want to find a full practice question, you can just search some sources of like propaganda from the Nazi period, and then just look at it and be like, okay, how is it reliable? Is there bias? What's the perspective? And just ask yourself some of those questions as well. And then for the essays, I think the best options are essay plans and responses. Now, essay plans, I'm not sure if many of you guys have heard of them, but essay plans are, you'll take an essay question and then you'll kind of just write a judgment statement for it. So you decide the answer to it. And then you'll have like paragraph 1, 2, and 3. You'll like separate your paragraphs. So maybe your first paragraph is, I don't know, on the political influence, and the next one's on the social influence, and then the third one's on the cultural influence. And then you'll just kind of have some points. Maybe you'll note down what like specific facts or what specific historian quotes you want to use from that. And it's basically just like a plan of your essay. It's just like a draft of it. That is such an effective study technique, because a lot of the essays, nearly most of them in modern history, are going to be judgment essays where you need to have a judgment and you need to have like your mind made up about a certain point. So I think essay plans are really good because you can literally have a judgment for every single dot point in the syllabus. And then when you get in on your trial day, on your HSC day, you'll see a question, but you already have your judgment decided, and you also know how you want to structure out your paragraphs, which already organizes your structure criteria, but also your judgment criteria. You already go in knowing what you want to argue, rather than sitting there and being like, okay, do I want to argue this? And you know what it's like on the exam day. You see a question, you're like, oh, do I argue this? Oh, but what if I argue this? Oh, but like it's true, but it's false. Like, you don't want to have to waste your time, especially modern history. It's 3 hours to do those 50 marks of short answers and 2 25-mark essays. Like, it's insane, the time limit for so much work and so much writing. So essay plans are really good because it gets rid of that time that you physically have to plan and really sit there and like doubt yourself and decide. And then once you've done those essay plans, then you can move on to practice essays. I recommend essay plans. I know other people will say, oh, just write practice essays, but I think that doing essay plans first is really good because it can help you just build up that skill of modern history essay writing, where you can build and structure those paragraphs, and then you take those plans and turn them into essays. Now, do you have to have an essay for every single plan? No. If you want to, go ahead, and obviously that's the goal. Like, I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with that. Like, that is amazing. Personally I couldn't, but try to get as many as you can done of actual essays. If your teachers are marking responses, get them to read it and give them feedback. Otherwise, you can give them to your friends, to other teachers at your school, whoever you can get feedback from, definitely go to for feedback. But I think essay plans, a great way to study. They're also not too heavy. Like you can set an hour of study, for example, and maybe do like 30 minutes of essay plans and then like 3 practice questions. And that's such effective study and it's helping you directly for the exam. So those are my tips for modern history study. I feel like stopping at notes is a really big mistake that a lot of students are making, because there's already so much content and it's no use having all this content but not being able to apply it. And especially if you're going in on trials the first day, for the first time, and that's the first time that you're applying content, you don't actually have that skill of application. And I think that's across other subjects too. Same with memorizing essays in English. You can memorize an essay word for word, but if you haven't practiced applying your memorized essay to another question before the actual exam, it's not going to show up in your marks. So I think a lot, and one of the biggest mistakes in studying for like content subjects is that a lot of students are stopping just at the content, and it's like, okay, well, I know the content, that's all I need to know. But applying that content is so important, and the more you practice applying it, the better you'll find that your results are going to be. So that's my advice for that. We're going to go through short answer skills, short answer structuring, and then also essay structuring in different ways to write essays, how to form judgments, how to build theses, all of that, guys. We're going to go through all of that. So no stress here. Leave any questions about studying in the live chat. I'll be there live and we will discuss. But yeah, I wanted to just talk a little bit about studying for modern because I just don't think it's spoken about enough. And I think that everyone's very big on, it's just like notes or past papers, but it's just like, oh, study with notes or past papers. And no one really expands on that, or at least what I found when I was doing my HSC. I was very big on trying to find which study techniques were going to work best for me. And I personally was not the most disciplined. I'm not even going to lie. I was not one of those 5 a.m. wake up, 6 hour study days, like 3 past papers a week. I couldn't. Personally, I wasn't like that. So it was really hard for me to find advice that was working for me because I feel like a lot of the advice was along those lines. And again, nothing wrong with that. I will never discredit that study. I have so much respect for people that can study that way, but it wasn't me, and I'm sure quite a few of you can relate. Sometimes you just don't, it's just not within you. You just can't do it. I love to sleep. I very much was a like I'd stay up late studying rather than like waking up early. So I just couldn't. I just couldn't personally, but that's just me. But hopefully this helps you guys out. I think that those are the most effective ways of studying. In terms of studying and learning your notes, like I said, it's one thing to write your notes, but after you've written your notes, then you've got to learn them. There's obviously different ways that you can learn them. For me, what was working with learning my notes, I'd like have them all printed. I really liked reading them after I had typed them. And then I'd have them printed and I'd just try to like sit and read them and go through, you highlight, make them all pretty, look through them. But I wouldn't want to stop there because I knew that a lot of the time, like, when you're highlighting notes, just looks pretty. Like you feel like you're doing work, but are you doing anything? I was more focused on the aesthetic of my notes than I was on actually learning them. So what was working for me was flashcards. Of like main content points and main syllabus points. I try to organize my flashcards based off the syllabus point. And then one of the best study techniques that was working for me was teaching others, and if not, teaching myself. Teaching others was hard because unless your friends are doing modern, like it's very hard to just be like, hey, let me tell you about the Nazi regime between these periods, or let me tell you about the power struggle with Stalin. Like very, very hard to sit with someone, and for someone, I also feel bad for the person who has to listen to that. So it's very hard to teach people unless they're doing modern. But teaching your friends, and if you don't have friends to teach, or your friends don't want to hear it, or they don't like that study technique, I'm being serious, teach yourself. Now I've seen it on TikTok too, and I used to do this too, so I was so happy when I saw it. Turn your phone on, pray that you have some storage, but turn your phone on, get onto your camera, and legit just record yourself explaining the content or like teaching. Either do that, or another thing I did, which probably sounds crazy, but I had a photo. I need to be careful how I say this because I've said this before and like it's come off wrong. I had a photo of kids, but they weren't kids. It was like animated kids in a classroom, and I had it like on my wall, and I would just sit and like teach them and pretend I was like speaking to them, explaining the notes. Now I know like a lot of you are probably like, this chick is literally insane, and I probably was. Like HSC can genuinely turn you insane, and you'll find yourself doing the craziest things to study. But that really helped me because I could sit and I could get it all out. And I think if you can teach the content, best believe you can answer the content, and you can answer questions. I think being able to teach it shows that you know it inside out. And as you're teaching it, you also find gaps where you're like, oh, wait, I don't actually know this point really well. And then you can stop and go back to that point and relearn it and then practice teaching it. And it's just a really good way to find out what you know well, what you don't, and gain confidence. After like once I spent like an hour, 2 hours just like explaining all the content or like going through the whole syllabus. And like I stopped and I was like, oh, I have like a 2 hour video of me talking about modern. And that made me feel really confident. And it's like, if I can speak about this for 2 hours, best believe I can answer 5 questions. So I think for your confidence as well, it's a very good technique. It feels awkward, like I'm not gonna lie, it's awkward, it's embarrassing. Like you have to sit and you have to like shut your inner thoughts out because you're sitting there like, why am I talking to myself for an hour on camera, or why am I talking to a picture of animated children on the wall? But I promise you that study technique is really, really good for modern, just because there's so much content to deal with it all. Now there's obviously all different ways you can use, but flashcards and teaching myself and others were some of the best things that I did, just to notice what I knew, what I didn't, but also for your confidence. I think confidence in modern is hard to gain because there's just so much content, and your marks can be all over the place depending on your skills. If you're really good at short answers, if you're really good at essays, you can be really good at essays, but maybe you just get a question and it's just not one of the points that you know really well. And same with short answers, like there's obviously certain dot points that you don't feel the most confident with. So it's very much a hit or miss. So I think gaining confidence in modern is really important for your mentality, and then that's also going to help your marks. But yeah, that's my little rant about modern study. I am really hoping that some of you guys are talking in the chat and we're having a chat about studying and I'm not just ranting. But yeah, leave any other questions below. I want to get to all of those and I will answer all of those in the live chat. But I really hope that helps just for wrapping up modern, because I think surviving modern is a skill, it's a flex. Don't let anyone tell you that modern isn't hard, and don't let anyone, like, if you complain about modern and someone's like, oh, at least it's not this, ignore. Modern history students know the struggle, and I'm convinced that unless you do modern, um you don't know. Like if I didn't do modern, I wouldn't have thought it was as hard, and like the nature of it is as challenging as it is. But it's a really challenging subject, and I'm not saying that to discourage you guys. It's to validate what you're feeling. I think it needs to be validated, just because in the whole spectrum, like when people talk about hard subjects, like modern isn't brought up. But I think the way that it's assessed and the extent of content, definitely a hard one. But that's my rant, guys. Let's get moving on. I really hope you guys are asking questions because I don't want to go on. Let's talk a little bit about the paper. Let's talk about the paper now. Short answers, so fun and fresh. Short answers, I feel like a lot of you guys will come to love, because in comparison to a 25-mark essay, like, trust me, and I mean this in other subjects as well, for English short answers as well, and for any subjects that you guys are doing that have short answers, take advantage of them. It is so much easier to get 3 out of 3 and 4 out of 4 than it's going to be to get 20 out of 20 on your common module essay, or 25 out of 25 on your Russia essay or your national study. I think short answers in HSC altogether, but especially in modern, short answers are the trick to pulling up your marks, because again, it's easy to pull in those shorter, like, little answers. So short answer is 50% of your paper. Yay. So section 1 and section 4 are made up of short answer questions, which is why it's really important to practice the skill. And I feel like one mistake that I was falling into was focusing so much on the essays, because I was like, oh, it's 25 marks, it's 25 marks. But in the end, so is your Nazi, like the core section, and so is section 4. They all are like equally split up. So you can focus and you can stress all about like your Russia essay, but your core study and these short answer questions is the exact same weighting, and it's easier to actually do better in this section. So let's connect the dots on that one. I had to have that talk with myself multiple times throughout year 12 because it was so easy to focus on the essays, and I feel I was exactly the same for English, where I was always focusing on like, oh, mod A, mod B, mod C, like all the modules. Short answers as well, and short answers is the easiest place to get full marks because of the nature of it across a lot of subjects. So that's why I wanted to do short answer skills, because I feel like it's neglected. They can range in marks anywhere from 1 to 8 marks, but also 9 to 15 marks, which are like mini extended responses. I haven't seen anything bigger than 12 in modern, but it's all a range. Now the short sections, now, like, I know I just said like, oh, it's It's easy. It's easy to get full marks. It's easy if you're treating it and you're studying for it the right way. If you're neglecting it, it is one of the easiest places to lose marks, and you can lose more marks than you do in the essay. So a lot of people think like, oh, it's just short answers, I won't study for it, like it's fine, like I would, like how hard can it be? But even if like these are like, I'd say these are pretty good marks for short answer. Like if you get like 2 out of 3, then 4 out of 5, 5 out of 7, 7 out of 10, that's 18 out of 25. That's literally like getting 18 out of 25 on an essay, which is 72%. And that's only from losing like 1 to 3 marks on each question, which doesn't even sound like, that doesn't even sound bad. While like a good essay for like your national study could be 21 out of 25, and that's 84%. So that's just how easily you can lose the marks if you're not taking it seriously. And a lot of students don't take it seriously. The average isn't too good for the short answer section. So that's why I really wanted to focus on it today. I know like that literally contradicts everything I just said. But short answer is easy and is a game changer as soon as you have the perspective that it is. You need to get it in your mindset that it's hard to get 25 out of 25 in the essays, and it's really hard to get into those higher range, like the higher band 6 for the essay. While for the short answer, getting 3 out of 3, 5 out of 5, you surely don't have to do that much, and you just have to fill the lines. I'm not going to downplay it because with the sources it is hard, and we're going to go through that, but this is a section, if you feel like your essay skills aren't the strongest, don't worry, because that's 50%. The other 50% is here. So if you can really smash out short answers, you'll find that it's really going to take up your mark. Now, the structure of your response is dependent on how many marks are allocated it, but no matter what, this is the base. I say it every lecture, so I'm sorry if you're at the modern lecture in Jan, but you're hearing it again. If you want a band 6, you fill the lines. You fill the lines. Do not write less. And then if you really, 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 really want a band 6, like if you were like, I need this band 6, go a little bit over. But I'm talking 1 to 2 lines max. We do not have time to go super, super over. Don't go overboard. The band 6, like, that's just the fact. Like if you want a band 6, the band 6 amount is the recommended amount is the lines that are there. So finish it like that. Roughly speaking, you have about 2 minutes per mark, but time distribution is obviously going to be different depending on the exam. It's not always going to be even. You have 45 minutes in total to complete this section, and a lot of students will finish it in 40. It just depends, and then it's up to you if you want to move on to the next section, have extra time for the essays, or go back and add anything extra to it. I really recommend using the time well. I think that that's why doing a practice section of the past, of like this section or doing past papers is important too, because you can kind of find out, okay, on average it takes me 40 minutes, which means I can get an extra 5 minutes for this essay. And you can kind of find out what method is working for you to finish it. But yeah, that is the short answer section. Now, I hate to do this. I'm going to be honest with you. Nothing annoyed me more. One of the worst things I had to learn in class across all my subjects was the task words. You know, identify, assess, analyze. Like, I'm sorry. If my year 12 self knew that like a year and a half later I would be teaching this to other year 12s, I would feel a sense of disappointment. But I mean it, like I feel bad because I used to get so annoyed at my teachers for like going on and on about the task word. I was like, nobody actually cares. But the task word is so important. I feel so bad. I hear my year 12 self-judging now. But task word in modern is so important because the structure is going to be dependent on the task word. And the task word is in every single section now because there's no multiple choice and it's specifically just short answer and essays. There will be a task word in every single question. 100% of the paper is going to feature a task word in every question. So that's why it is so important, and knowing the difference so you can also just structure what you need to do and what you don't need to do. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I don't want to hate for this. I'm sorry, but task word is so important. So these are some different task word questions. They aren't just filler words. They tell you exactly what you need to do to answer the question. So a lot of people ignore the task word and just opt to describe. And I was a victim of that because I didn't always listen to the lessons about task words. It's so easy to just describe in modern, especially because modern is mixed where everything you're learning in class is the story of it. But in class time, it's more up to you to make those judgments and to choose like your opinions and your kind of thought process on the content. The class is really just focused on learning the content, and I really saw modern as like the textbook is literally just reading a storybook. Like it's a storybook with facts. It's just the story of what happened. Um, and again, a lot of the textbooks aren't going to be like, this is the opinion, this is how it is. That's what history is. History is so up to interpretation. So that's really up to you to make those judgments. That's why the task word is so important, because if you aren't using those task words well, you're just going to opt to describe, which is just going to be to story time it. So many of the task words require more critical thinking than others. So there's higher order and lower order task words, and then usually, most cases, the shorter response, the lower order of the task word. Guys, I'm so sorry. I promise I'm going to go through it quick, but I just want you to have them just so you can see the difference. So identify is our favorite one. We love identify. Identify in modern is so good because it can be a 2-mark question and you will get 2 marks writing 4 words. So like this one, identify 2 features of Nazi ideology, social Darwinism and totalitarianism. 4 words, 2 marks out of 100 in the whole paper. It sounds small, but it adds up. 2 out of 2. We're getting it. You're literally just stating the key feature or that attribute. You're just stating it. I know people who saw identify and would still fill in like the entire lines they gave you. They might give you 2 lines for identify. You just write like 1, social Darwinism, and 2, totalitarianism. Those are your 2 marks. 3 words. 3 words. So identify, and this is why I think knowing the task words are well, because otherwise you could have spent like 2 minutes and like you could have like defined like one feature of Nazi ideology is social Darwinism, which is blah blah blah. Another feature, you don't even need to waste your time doing that. When it's identify, straight to the point, get on it. Then there's define, where you turn into definition.com, google.com, yeah, get straight onto it. With the core unit, I always recommend having the translation in English, like have the German word and then have the translation in English after. And then yeah, your definition doesn't necessarily have to be super detailed. It's just got to be enough that you're distinguishing it from other similar words. So this is Lebronson, which is living space, which is the expansionist ideology of the Nazi Party, whereby living space was to be seized from Eastern European populations and transferred to Aryan populations. Done. Full marks. Let's keep going. Okay. We love explain. Explain is just telling how things work. So this is explain the difference between democracy and totalitarianism. Now, a lot of the times when it's those types of terminology, you're going to start with like a definition, like comparison of the each, because that's like the nature of those concepts. And then you'll talk about the differences between the two. And then we've got describe, our absolute favorite. This is storytelling to a max. Main aspects, you're just describing it. Textbook copy, you're literally the textbook blurting it out. That is described. Now, this is where we start to get a little bit worse. Outline isn't too bad. It's really the next ones. Outline, and I really recommend knowing the answer to this question. Outline the key features of the Weimar Constitution, because I feel like the Weimar always comes up, and I don't know if this is a collective experience for modern students, but I don't know why I just ignored the Weimar, or I forgot about it when I was studying. I just found that it was just always being forgotten. But then somehow it came up in my trials, and I was like, oh, I don't love that one. So I don't know. Let me know if you guys are in the live chat if that is a collective experience or not. But the 3 major components of it are the Reichstag Chancellor and the President, and then you'd go in to explain all that. If you were ever talking about the Weimar Constitution, you need to talk about Article 48, which is like that emergency term that they can use in the Reichstag to take over. That needs to be spoken about. But outline is just the main features of what happened and just kind of like a summary of it. I feel like outline, explain, and describe, very similar. So it's mainly being able to distinguish them and just knowing that you're gonna have to write more for those than you would have to for identify or define, just by the nature of it. Like if you're looking at the length, like let's look at how as we're moving along, the length of the responses are getting longer. We've got 4 words, couple lines, and then it's really packing on as we move. Yay! So then we get to the higher task words, guys. Starting not at the worst ones. We've got compare and contrast and then account for. These are notorious, and the higher task words are going to be in your essay questions. So being able to know the difference. Compare and contrast is identify the characteristics or qualities two or more things have in common. So for a compare and contrast question, that is so different to an account for or to an analyze. So different because you're literally comparing like the two. And for this one, it would be Germany and Europe and Japan in the Asia Pacific. This can also come up in the short answers as one of the like the 12 markers. But they do come up in the essay questions as well. You're just more likely to get one of these. These are like the highest order ones. They can come up these, but you're most likely to get them here. This is more for the 12 markers, and then the slight chance that you get them in the essays. And then account for is explain and give reasons for, and account for is usually going to be an argument as well. So that's account for Mussolini's rise to power. This is our favorite, guys. Assess, evaluate, analyze, and to what extent. To what extent? So assess is always got to do with the importance, and same when you're evaluating. So it's always going to be like assess the significance. It'll very much involve the importance of that that impact, where you want to look at the positive, negatives, and the disputable aspects. Then analyze is like breaking it down to its parts, discussing them, and then showing the interrelation. So analyze the changing nature of Soviet foreign policy. And then to what extent is just like the case for that evidence, and to what extent obviously you have to have that judgment of the extent. So in analyze, you're not necessarily always going to have to really push the judgment as much as you would for assess and to what extent. For to what extent, naturally, like if you say to a high extent or to a low extent, that's your judgment. And same for assessment, it's like assess the significance. You're going to have to say how significant it is. While for analyze is much more like a breakdown and like discussion. So you still would have a judgment, but it just wouldn't be, and it wouldn't have to be as pushed as it would in a to what extent or into an assess question. But those are the task words, guys. I'm very sorry. I wanted to fly through them because I promise you, I hated it as well. I really didn't like sitting in class and listening to it. And the way that you have to like listen to it across all your different subjects, like it's not giving. It's not giving. Let's get into source skills. We love sources. So for the source skills, for 1 to 2 mark questions, get straight to the point. Nobody actually cares. You don't need detail. You don't need introduction. You don't need a like starting line, little thesis. Answer the question. Do it as directly as possible with as minimal words as possible. Get straight to it. If it's 1 or 2 marks, why are we worrying about it? And I know that some students, because it's like 2 marks, they're like, oh, but it's still 2 marks. Like, I've got to write 2 sentences. No. 2 answers. 2 answers if it's 2 marks. And usually if it's a 2 mark, they'll be like, it's like the question we saw before where it's like identify 2 features. So just identify them. You have to be like, the 2 features identified are this and this. No, just identify them. Then 3 to 5 mark questions, guys. We've got to be big kids. We've got to use full sentences. You want to do some context. Some. I mean like nothing more than a sentence, or like half a sentence if it's 3 marks. No more. And then include at least one piece of evidence, which is like a detail, like, or reference to the source. But each point you make, you should kind of have some evidence to back it up, but that's more for like 4 to 5. Like, let's get straight to it. 6 to 8 in modern is where I think it starts to get serious, where like we really got to get on it. When it's 6 to 8, that's where you want to start structuring your responses more, where you have like a very short introduction. I think like 1 point per 2 marks. So if it's 6 mark question, you should have like 3 points that you want to make. So like, let's say this question here, outline the key features of the Weimar Constitution, was a 6 mark. Then you'd want 3 points. And then your 3 points would be explaining the Reichstag, the Chancellor, and then the President. That's an example of how I would structure that. And then you want at least 1 piece of evidence per point, preferably more, especially if it's getting up to 8. But it is what it is. Now, being able to integrate sources is so important. We love source studies. For the course study, you will be given at least 1 prescribed source for most of your responses. So in that first section, you'll get at least 1, and then other times you'll have to talk about 2 sources in 1 response, because it literally is a source-based study. So in terms of evidence and being able to integrate the sources, a lot of that evidence is genuinely going to come from the sources, and then you'd want to have like a couple extra details and like own facts or like sources that you know from yourself, or like historian quote here and there. But otherwise, you don't want to go overboard on memorizing too much there, because a lot of it is coming from the sources they've given you. It is a source-based study. Effective integration is not quoting the entire source and then not providing any analysis and leaving it at that. Effective integration is explicit. So, as shown in source A, we're putting on our modern hats, and we're going to be that modern student. Or like source A depicts and it's very analytical. It's not descriptive. So we're going to look at some of those skills. So let's look at this one, guys. We're analyzing this source, Hitler with a child. Let's have a look. I want you guys to think about the different ways that you can analyze this. I can analyze this and just describe what's in the photo, or I can analyze it and use that description to make an analysis and prove a judgment, or prove the nature of what this picture is actually depicting. Let's talk about what I mean. So I could say source A is a photograph taken in Nazi Germany, the salient image being that of Adolf Hitler, the Führer, with a little blonde girl who appears younger than 3. Hitler is smiling, whereas the young girl was a scowl. Well, thanks. I actually couldn't see that. I actually couldn't tell. I don't want to sound mean saying that, but I wanted to show you guys just the difference, because sometimes you don't even realize you're doing it. And I literally did it as well, where it's so easy to see the source and just get into like the describing of it and like what it's showing. But it's very much in English. Can you guys tell that I'm going to be an English teacher? Because for some reason she wants to bring in English to all of history, but English and history are very connected. But same in English, in creative writing, like showing and not telling. That is literally just telling. Like, you're literally just telling me, like, thank you for telling me what my eyes literally saw. Thanks. But instead you could do, source A reveals the way in which Hitler was presented through propaganda in Nazi Germany. Look at how it starts. In order to consolidate the Führer myth, propaganda such as this that depicts Hitler with young Aryan children served to not only humanize the dictator, but also further reinforce the paternalistic image of Hitler, presenting him as the loving father of all Aryan Germans. Please, full marks. Can we see the difference? See how they've literally only taken Hitler being the Führer and the blonde girl. Like, they've just taken the actual features of the image and then analyze them. That's the difference with analyzing and describing. And I think that's so important in like the task words as well. Because if it was a describe and it was like, describe what this source shows, which let me just tell you now, you are never going to be asked to describe this source. Because if it was just describe this source, you're just going to describe what's there. But because it is an analyze, and a lot of your sources, like if you're doing any source work, it's source integration and it's an analytical source study. So you're going to have to be analyzing it. These are the types of responses you want to use. And this is how you really want to kind of like structure it, where you want to start with like a general kind of little source A reveals this. And then you want to connect the points. So instead of saying it shows this image of Hitler, the Führer, show how it reveals him as the Führer, and what propaganda and paternalistic image it's presenting. So yeah, that's how to get a band 6 in modern, guys. You're welcome. You can't just take the source at face value. There's a multitude of things that can affect the source's usefulness. And this is where we need to assess perspective and reliability. So analyzing that affects not only how useful it is, but exactly what it can be used for. And we're going to look at that later. But perspective and reliability are two things that we're really going to look at in this section. So perspective is the particular attitude or worldview regarding something, so the perspective that it shows, and the reliability is to which it's accurate or trustworthy. So those are two different things, but a lot of the time it's easy to get them confused, and I feel like I did the exact same thing. I'm not even going to lie, like the last thing I want to do in any of my lectures, but especially in modern, is sit here and be like, yeah, perfect grade A modern student. I was on top of my notes 100% of the time, and I did 2 past papers a week and blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not even going to pretend like I didn't find source work hard. It is hard, and it's definitely a skill that you have to build yourself up to. But you guys just being here, we're manifesting the band 6 that you choose to be here in your holidays. Let's look at what can affect perspective and reliability. So there's implicit biases, which are age, gender, nationality, religion, class, profession, education. And then there's explicit biases, which come from like your purpose and your motive of like the source. So the search for rewards, personal prejudices, like to boost support or morale, ideological agendas and political agendas. And then there's structural factors, like if content is censored, if the source is like complete or incomplete, and like the mythology. the secondary, if it's a primary or secondary source. Sorry, can't pronounce that word today. Mythology. Method. Anyways, let's pretend that this isn't happening. The one thing I really want to tell you guys, and this is, I feel like this is such like a little hack of modern. If you ever get a like an extract, which always comes up, I feel like, in the HSC or in trials, like you'll get it at least in either trials or HSC. If you ever get an extract and it's asking about the limitations of it, naturally, because it's an extract, it's limited. Even if the extract is 100% true, because it's an extract and it's not the full picture, you can literally, like, hypothetically, maybe the extract is like proving like some, like, one specific point, but the paragraph after it proves the opposite. But because you've only gotten that extract, you'd think, oh, the source is super reliable in proving this. No, it's not, because you haven't got the full complete picture. So even if the source is perfect, it's not. We need to get this down straight. There is no perfect source. Sometimes you'll see a source and you'll be like, wow, the perspective, it's so reliable. No. No source is perfect, because all of them, consciously or subconsciously, are going to be affected by one of these. So let's look at how we can assess the reliability of the source. And you should always aim to have at least 3 reliability tests, but you can do 2. It's up to you. But like, the more tests that you can do it, the better you test it. I think that these are some questions that you can ask, and it's just, I like, when I would look at a source, I was like, okay, if I ask myself these questions, then I could see how reliable it was. So was the source produced in close proximity, time or place to the event? So that's very important. That also judges whether it's a primary or secondary source. Going back to year 7 history, guys. Was it produced by someone involved in the event? Was it produced to be published? Was it produced for personal, political, ideological, educational, entertainment purposes? Is it an extract? Was it the product of extensive research? And was it peer reviewed? All of these are going to affect the reliability. So I think that memorizing just a couple of them, I know there's already so much to learn in modern, but just having a few of these memorized means that you can apply it to so many different questions, so many different practices, your trials, your HSC. It's just one skill. Even if you want to put them on a flashcard and just have one flashcard, and it can just be called reliability test. And maybe the first couple of times you try out like practice questions for source answers, if you have that flashcard next to you, and there's also nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with having some notes next to you and doing like practice responses with them there. Obviously, that's not the final way you want to be studying, but like, as you're first starting to get into practice responses, don't think that there's anything wrong with having your notes and practicing how to structure them and respond to them there. You can always use it as a starter and build into it. Don't think, oh, I'm gonna go on another rant, because I don't like that there's just this one ideal way that you have to study, and if you don't study this way, you're failing. No, it's not true. Fake news. I've had enough of it. It's fine to start that way. Do not feel guilty, and don't make anyone make you think that that's, not effective. That as a starting method, just as like typing notes and copying them, or like using other people's notes, or like, we're literally called ATAR notes. Like, our company is ATAR notes, and we have those textbooks, which are all just notes, which I'm going to admit, I had the books and I was writing a lot of the notes word for word. Personally, there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. Enough. I will not rant about this any longer, but guys, I'm against it. I'm on an agenda. I have a personal purpose and a personal agenda against this. But yeah, if you guys have that flashcard, and again, if you're struggling to memorize them, or even if you want to look at some sources, or like look at some online, and then have that flashcard and think, okay, was it produced for political purposes? Is it an extract? And you can ask yourself those questions. As you get the answers to those questions, that's your answer. That's your assessment. That's literally your response, is your answer to these questions. So these questions can naturally answer most, if not all, of the source questions that you're going to get. So let's do a little test. So we've got this source, is your washroom breeding Bolsheviks? So we've got, what is the source? What is the context of the source? What is the purpose motive of the source? And do you think the source is reliable? We've got, these are the questions that you can ask, and they come from these reliability tests, which are really important. But it's got the key quotes: employees lose respect for a company that fails to provide decent facilities for their comfort. Try wiping your hands 6 days a week on harsh, cheap paper towels or awkward, unsanitary roller towels, and maybe you too would grumble. So that's where you can look at, especially these quotes, and question the purpose or the motive of where they're coming from, but also just the context of them. So let's look at the difference If the question was, how reliable is the source in reflecting American attitudes towards communism in the 1930s, that changes the question. Does it not? Does it not? That changes the nature of the question in comparison to just looking at the source. And that's why the question and what they're asking you about the source is so important. And I think that doing like practice questions and past sections is so important, because naturally you're answering the source in relation to the question. I can look at this source and ask anything and say anything about the source, but if it's about a specific attitude, or it's about, and this one's specifically reflecting American attitudes, then it's going to be different to a normal response about what this source or like an analysis of this source. So naturally the answer is going to be based on the specific questioning of the question. So this is where factual reliability and reliability as evidence comes in, and they are different. So factual reliability is whether or not the content of the source is factually accurate and can be collaborated by other facts, statistics, and sources relevant to the events, issues in question. While reliability as evidence is whether or not the content of the source, irrespective of its factual accuracy, can be used as evidence of attitudes, beliefs, and agendas at the time of those producing the source and their audience, is the fact that the source is biased. So it's like, is bias a good thing? And I think the way that history is kind of taught, especially throughout year 7 to 10, we're always taught that bias is bad. I'm going to look at this about like a bit, but as reliability for evidence, bias isn't necessarily bad because it shows you that attitude and that perspective better. So when we look at this source, factually, it's unreliable because US workers are not becoming radicalized because their tissues aren't too high. And the Scots Tissues Tower objective is to sell tissues, not to provide a factually accurate amount of Marxist influence amongst worker space in the US. But as evidence, it's highly reliable of the fact that US attitudes towards communism at this time were negative, and that the fear of communism was high, corroborated by the Red Scare and Reds under the bed rhetoric. So as a reflection of this question and of this perspective, it's highly reliable, but factually it's not. But as evidence it is. So I hope you guys can see the difference of that. And I think as soon as I started to understand the differences between both, I feel like it was much easier to just answer questions, because it was so easy to just look at the factual reliability. But then I felt like I was limiting myself in answers, because a lot of the time, even though they're factually unreliable because of the bias in them, or like the implicit bias, whatever it was dealing with, that bias actually shows the evidence of attitudes and their beliefs and their agendas. So it's like two-sided. Again, in history, nothing is perfect, no source is perfect, and nothing is like 100% agree or disagree. There's always going to be other sides. So I think having this mindset and being able to distinguish between the two will help you in your marks. So bias is one of the most overused and misunderstood words in HSC history, and it's not your fault, because from year 7 to 10 and even onwards, you're taught that bias is bad. But I'm biased, you're biased, we're all biased, whether we want to admit it or not, and a lot of us are implicitly and explicitly biased, you don't even realize. But bias isn't synonymous with, can I speak English today, with unreliability or usefulness. So bias isn't inherently a bad thing, and in some cases it even makes the source even more useful. So don't make generalized statements like this source isn't effective because of its bias against this. Okay, what do you mean by that? Because it is bias against that, you can say, instead of bias, you can say the underlying ideology, or you can say the bias signifies the underlying political agenda or the underlying personal prejudice, which actually makes it reliable as evidence towards those ideologies, towards their attitude, towards the beliefs of that side, which helps you understand that side of the history, or that person or that party, etc. So let's just understand that bias is bad, guys. Let's move on. Integrating your own knowledge is also super important. So this includes non-prescribed sources and general detail info. And it's very easy to over-rely on the prescribed source. And this is what I was talking about before, where if you only rely on the source, you mainly do need to rely on the source, but you do want to be bringing in your other details. And if you're just talking about the source and just like all your evidence is the source, it'll really come out in your mark. So for example, I just want to show it this way. We've got outline the economic transformation of the USSR under Stalin, and this was the prescribed source, which is discipline in the collective farms, and it's got the tax strength and working. If you talked about this and it was the economic transformation of the USSR under Stalin, if you guys have done this point, you guys are doing Russia as your national case study, you'd know that economic transformation is collectivization, but the other half of it is industrialization. So you wouldn't even get the full marks on this question, even if you analyze this source to a T, because naturally you're missing the other 50% of economic transformation, even though it's a source question. So I wanted to put this in because if you're not looking at the whole picture, naturally you're not going to get all the marks. And a lot of the time, because it is the source study and there's so much focus on sources, it's really easy to be like, okay, I don't need any historian quotes, I don't need any general details or information, I'll just go in on the day. And I knew people in my class who were like this, who were like, oh no, but it's all based on the sources, so like I'm just going to go in and like write about the sources. That's not enough, because the sources have to be paired with like knowledge that you're learning from class. There's no point that they're going to teach that whole core study unit and then you're not going to need any of it. So let's look at this one. As shown in source A, a Soviet propaganda poster from 1933, collective farms introduced under Stalin's policy of collectivization under the 5-year plans radically altered the economic landscape of the USSR, with approximately 91% of all agricultural land collectivized by the early 1930s. Furthermore, industrialization was another major focus of the 5-year plans and Stalin's economic transformation, as evidenced by Stalin's statement. And then it's got a quote. When you look at the difference there, that's got reference to the source, but it's also looking at the other half of it, which has nothing to do with the source, but is still the answer to the question. So that's just an example of how you need to still bring in other points, and it can't just over reliance on over reliance on the source. I don't know where I'm thinking. Over reliance on the source and not enough on the actual details, things you're learning from class. So let's look at this one. Using source A and your own knowledge, outline the flaws of the Weimar Constitution. You best believe I put this in for you guys out of my own struggle to remember Weimar Constitution. We've got this this source. And before I hear anything, it's an extract. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Naturally, it's not true. But yeah, I wanted to put this in just so you guys, I thought I put an answer to this that we could try it together, but because we've done a lot together, I guess you guys can write some of these in the chat and I'll respond to them in the chat. I'm gonna let go of your hands, guys. I'm not holding your hand anymore. I'm letting go. If you guys want to have a read through this source and leave any you don't even have to answer it in full marks, even if you want to just outline some of the flaws that it's talking about. And if you want to practice linking that to some details that you already know, I am happy to give you guys some feedback on that. So there were flaws. The Constitution had no steering preamble that laid out a vision of a democratic Germany. The proportional voting system contributed mightily to the political fragmentation of Weimar, so on and so on. So if you guys want to have a little read of it, I'll give you guys a minute and we will get moving on. Okay, I'm hoping some of you guys are leaving stuff in the live chat. Okay, let's talk about essays and some essay skills now. That's our short answer section done. So I really hope that helped just sum up some of the skills that you guys need and what's going to get you the marks there. Any questions about sources, short answers, please leave in the live chat. I'm going to be there the full 2 hours. So ask me any questions, guys. I'm live and ready to answer. Let's talk a little bit about essays, because there are different essays that you can write in modern. So these are the 3 types. You can do thematic essays, factors essays, or syllabus essays, or differentiated essays. So differentiated essays is when you get a question like this. So I don't know if you guys have seen questions like, to what extent was the new economic policy the most critical factor in the Bolshevik consolidation of power? To what extent was the Treaty of Versailles the most critical factor in the collapse of the Weimar? So it's like when it gives you one event in significance to another. So it allows you to discuss other significant factors or issues other than the sum of the question. So let's say you got this one, the Treaty of the Versailles, being the most critical factor in the collapse of the Weimar Republic. If you wanted to argue against this and say, yes, it was important, but these other factors were important as well, you'd have to naturally do a differentiated essay. Otherwise, you could just write a normal essay and then say, yes, it was the most effective or the most critical, and here are my 3 points why. But if you wanted to argue that, yes, it was one of the, but there were other factors too, you'd want to do a differentiated essay. Now, for differentiated essays, these are some mistakes you can make. Allowing you to address other factors. A lot of people think that you stop referring to the STEM factor. So let's say it was like the Treaty of Versailles and you're talking about other points, but while you're talking about those other points, you're forgetting to bring up the Treaty of Versailles. That means you're forgetting to address the question. And I think that's one of the hardest things with differentiated essays, because you're talking about other factors. It's easy to like forget about the STEM factor, but in the end, like the question is asking you about that specific point. So even if you're speaking about another point, you want to make sure you're consistently referencing it, or you're comparing it, and then like making those links where you're like, therefore, although the Treaty of Versailles was a critical factor, this event had an even more impactful influence, or this event was of equal influence, or, sitting there. Then sitting on the fence is another issue with differentiated essays, because different factors have different impacts. Some might be positive, some might be negative, some are huge, some are small. But even with reference to that, you need to still have an overall judgment on the overall impact. So a lot of people with differentiated essays are like, therefore, all three affected it. You can't really argue that, because that's not really a judgment. You still want to have like an overall impact and an overall judgment where you admit that one did, but the other two did, or maybe like, although this one did, these two events had more impact. You still want to make sure you have a judgment. So it's fine to be like, to admit that all of them affected it, but you need to still notice that each impact is going to impact it differently. So there's still got to be the judgment and the overall impact on that event. So I think with differentiated essays, just keeping in mind that you're still answering it to that question. And I made this mistake. I got an essay like this and I wrote a differentiated essay without even realizing it for Russia. And because there was only one event, but I disagreed that was the most important, I only did one paragraph on that event on the STEM factor, and then another 2 paragraphs on the other ones. And I didn't even bring up the STEM factor because I was like, oh no, but I'm arguing different events. And then I lost marks there because I wasn't actually answering the question by forgetting to address that STEM factor. So that's a mistake that's really easy to make, that I admit I even made myself. You also want to make really clear judgments. So you don't want to sit on the fence or present too many like conflicting arguments. You want like your overall judgment to be supported by each factor, and your overall judgment doesn't even have to be really hard. It can be like, the implementation of Lenin's social political reforms was a highly critical factor within the Bolshevik consolidation, but it was not the most important factor, as others played a similarly critical role. Or you can do, which is even more sophisticated, the implementation of Lenin's social and political reforms was a highly critical factor within the Bolshevik consolidation of power, demonstrating the significance of popular sport in maintaining control. So you just want to make sure that you still have that clear judgment. This is an example of like an essay sample of how it would start. So the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was a highly critical factor within the Bolshevik consolidation of power. However, the importance of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk must be considered as just one in a series of critical factors, all of which were undercut by 2 central aims: maintaining popular support and the implement directly or create the conditions for socialism. And then if you see how we bring in the significance of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was enhanced by the similar, where am I? By the similar aims of the Bolsheviks in regards to the implementation of early social and political reforms, the civil war and war communism, and the new economic policy, all of which demonstrates the interrelated importance between all factors contributing to consolidation. So that's how you can see that even though it admits it was a highly critical factor, there were other ones as well that need to be considered. It's drawing the similarities between them and then showing the differences between the events. So that's the differentiated essays. Differentiated essays, I think, are one of the hardest things to do in modern history, but it is a skill that you want to feel confident in the case that you do get one of those questions, and they do come up. I remember getting them for one of my internals. So just being familiar with them, and I think having a name to them, like I didn't even know that they were a thing. Like I just thought they were like an essay, and I was like, oh, but you're like disagreeing with it. Like it's just like, it's like you're debating like the low extent, but it's actually not. There's a certain structure that you use for it, and there's points and mistakes that you want to look out for. Now in essay writing, you also want to watch out for narrative writing, which is kind of like what I was saying before with the storytelling modern, which is so easy to fall into the trap for. Don't even feel bad. I did it all the time. But narrative can be defined as a spoken or written account of connected events, real fiction, typically in a chronological structure. So in narrative writing, the purpose is to relate a series of images, a series events and actions to your reader. While in analytical writing, the purpose is to explain how these images relate to a broader theme, how they relate to each other, and how their short and long term is impacting them. So we're doing analytical writing in HSC Modern History. We are not doing narrative writing, but writing narratives in history is really easy because it means that you're focusing too much on describing like the main chronological features of the event, and it's still relevant to the question, but you're not, or you're doing it to a limited extent, analyzing the event and its significance, its impact, its relationship with other factors. So that's the difference, where it's hard because you need balance. You can't just like 100% analyze and not have any like contextual, like you still need to bring up, like even when you best believe she's going to bring up English again. But let's, for example, because everyone does English, so you guys are all English students. When you're writing an English essay, you're not going to just drop the quote. Like you're going to start off like with the context, or like where that's coming from in the plot. So when this character goes through this, here's a quote proving that. Here's my analysis. I honestly think it's exactly the same in modern, where you're not going to just drop this massive analysis on this event without bringing up the event first. Like you want to at least define the event or explain what it was, 1-2 sentences. Like just, you still need that sense of narrative writing, but it's being able to stop and be like, okay, I've described it now, I've brought up, I've explained it, now I need to analyze, and not getting too stuck in just retelling the story. And that's why I think going beyond writing notes is so important, because if you're just writing notes, you're not practicing. And I feel like if you're just writing notes, it's so easy to fall into narrative writing because your notes are really just the narrative and you don't really get to practice analyzing that information. So yeah, trust me, I love notes. I don't want to sound like I hate notes. Notes are my favorite study method. But in terms of effective and studying the smartest way possible, applying those notes and practicing with practice questions and essay plans can help you do that analyzing. Now let's talk about judgments. Again, guys, I feel like I'm doing an English lecture because it's the same thing with English. It's not enough to just have a judgment in your intro and like leave it out the rest of the essay. At a minimum, you need to feature your judgment in every single paragraph. My go-to is bring up your judgment at the beginning and the end of every paragraph. Just naturally. If you're doing that, naturally, you should have a judgment at least 8 to 10 times your entire essay if you're doing a 3-paragraph structure. But you don't want to just bring up your judgment once and then you're not carrying it through the rest of the essay. You want your argument to make its way into your paragraphs so that your arguments are actually proving that judgment and that thesis the entire way through. So all content needs to be relevant and it needs to make sure that it's working towards that goal. And in modern history, you don't have to include all the content you've studied. Detail is essential, but specific statistics and quotes are not sacred. Like it's not like if you don't have this specific statistic, you're not going to get a band 6. It's not how it works. You want to have that content, and that detail is so important, but it's not like there's specific points or specific facts that you need to memorize. Having a better judgment is so much more important. So much more important. So let's look at it. If we think of a judgment as the home of your essay, a good essay, it's got the content, the evidence, and the detail, and then it's got the point. But a bad essay is going between content. Oh, it's making a point, content. Where's the evidence? Nothing. So you want to make sure you're linking back to the judgment, but you're also pairing your evidence with the judgment, and you're using that evidence to prove that you're right. This history essay is literally just proving that you're right. Like if you are a person who likes to be right, guys, it's me. But if you like to be right and you like proving your point and proving that you're right, this is literally what you're doing in your history essay. And just like when you're proving you're right and you're like, yeah, so like I said, that's literally what I said. Like I said, I'm right. Tell me I'm wrong. That's literally what you're doing to your marker. And the only way that you can do that and to be like, oh, tell me I'm wrong, tell me this isn't true, is to bring up the thesis and like link back to it. So good ways to carry the judgment is to consistently link back to it. So if you do blah, 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 that's affirming the significance of the event. The accuracy of this statement is further revealed through blah, blah, blah. It is evident that this was a highly critical factor. Just making those link back sentences is so important, and trying to integrate these phrases a few times within each paragraph. You'll be amazed at the difference that it makes. So that's why I say that at least at a minimum, beginning and end of every paragraph link back to your judgment. And honestly, the more you do it, the even better, because it's just reminding your marker that you're writing the essay and you've got that structure. So we're getting brownie points in the marking room, guys. It helps you stay on track with your argument, but it also reminds them that you haven't forgotten the question and you're not just like blurting out like a memorized essay or like a narrative. So let's play a game, guys. Here are 3 theses to the question. I need answers in the live chat, please. I need some answers. It says the significance of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk to the Bolshevik consolidation of power. So we've got 1, the treaty was an important treaty signed by Russia in 1918 to get them out of war. 2, the treaty was highly significant to the Bolshevik consolidation of power. Or 3, the Bolshevik consolidation of power, a key issue after the 1917 revolution, whereby the Bolsheviks seized power from the provisional government, was greatly impacted by the treaty, as it ensured Russia's exit from a conflict which they were ill-equipped to sustain. I want them ranked, guys. I want them ranked in the chat. I will provide some feedback. But again, this is why the task was important. Assess the significance and which one and where we're finding the judgment. So if I wanted to do a descriptive response, it could look like this. So assess the importance of Lenin to the Bolshevik consolidation of power. Vladimir Lenin, born blah, 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 was a prominent communist revolutionary theorist and a respected leader. And then it's going on about his titles and what he was critical of and what his government did. Okay, thanks. Does this not look like a point from like a textbook? Like, does it not look like a textbook extract? But a detailed response is where you would use those descriptive points but link them to evidence. So Lenin was of great importance to the Bolshevik consolidation of power, as it was his leadership and ideology that underpinned all Bolshevik action during the period. Lenin's influence, and it's going into some of his roles that he had in the government. So instead of just bringing up those roles or like what he did, it's like analyzing that, and it's actually assessing how that was important in relation to the consolidation of power. So that's the big difference, and I hope you guys can see the difference in between paragraphs. I feel like this is wikipedia.com, like Britannica, like I just feel like I'm reading a paragraph on like who he is, and it's like one of those like first like introductory. You don't need to do that. The HSC markers know very well who he is. They're asking this question. So I think focusing on detail and detail over description is so much more important in modern, which again is why practicing putting your notes into short answer will help you, because a lot of your notes naturally will be description from the textbook, because a lot of the textbook is going to be description with a hint of detail, while your responses are going to be detail based. So keeping it simple for your markers and for your sake is so important. A lot of people think that the more sophisticated it is, the better it is, or like if it's sophisticated, it's super complicated and really like philosophical and you're getting paid 6. Not necessarily. The more complicated your thesis is, the more harder it is, not only for you to sustain it without switching judgments or getting confused, but also for your marker to understand your judgment. If you're going here, there, like you're proving it, then no, it's not this, but yes, it is, but oh, it's not, but here's an exception. Like if you're going all around on different points, naturally it's going to be hard for you to stay on topic and to link back to that judgment, but also for your marker to understand what you're saying. All your thesis should do is answer the question in its purest form. So you literally just want to answer the question that you're being asked as purely as you can. Your arguments and the historical detail is what you're going to use to make your judgment shine. So your judgment is just kind of the base, and it's kind of like the foundation, like the concrete of the house, and then you're building this nice house on top of it, but it can't be built without that base. So that's why it's so important to just have that solid base. It's also not English. It is also not English. I feel maybe a bit of an assumption, but a lot of history students are English students. Like you're English history smart. Like I don't think that's an assumption. It probably is. But like English history smart kids, like usually English and history go really well together. So a lot of the times history students are trying to write essays in the same way that they would for English, but English is very focused on language and vocabulary. It's not that modern history isn't. It's not that we want you saying like, I believe Lenin was very impactful to the Bolshevik. You're not going to use super simple vocabulary, but it's not like you're going to be upmarked if you're, synonym.com in your brain and pulling out like these super extensive, complicated vocabulary. That's not going to do much for you, especially if you don't understand what those words mean. You know how teachers are always like, oh, like you can use all these big words, but like they don't even make sense because like you're just using a mix of like big words. Or sometimes you'll read like prac essays or like exemplars and like you have no clue what they're talking about because there's just so many like obnoxiously large and like significantly extensive like vocabulary and language used that you're like, I don't even know what's going on. That doesn't matter. Don't worry about it in modern. I think that's why essay plans are good, because you can plan out these judgments beforehand and you can literally build your thesis. You can genuinely build your thesis and already have your idea and how you're going to prove it set out. And your thesis also needs to be strong and assertive. But you want to leave that to your arguments if you're going to like go back and forth. So if your judgment was that Detente overall failed to achieve its objectives, you can provide nuance in your arguments by saying though he did initially desolate tensions, blah, 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 it failed to achieve long terms. So it's fine to have nuance, and it's great if you can be like, oh, in the short term it failed, but in the long term it was successful. But you don't want that in the thesis, bring it up in the arguments. Your thesis wants to be straight to the point, and very assertive, very strong. This is my argument. And then you can counter it here and there in the arguments and in your paragraphs, but at the end you still want your thesis to be like the solid base. Guys, it's the concrete. It's the concrete. We're going to use an analogy. It's the concrete of the house. You want it to be at the base. You can build up different things on top, but at the base, this is how it is. So if we've got this one, the Cold War was at its core ideological. To what extent is the statement a reflection of it? We've got the role of ideology underpin all other factors during the Cold War. Thus, the statement is highly accurate. During the Cold War, there were two ideologies, communism and capitalism. The role of ideology was paramount during the development of the Cold War. I'm just trying to think. Which one is it? Guys, the fact that this one says, thus the statement is highly accurate is so important. One thing with extent is that a lot of the time students they'll be arguing to a high extent, but they don't actually specify the extent. So say like, thus the statement is true to a high extent, or thus the statement is accurate to a significant extent, or like name the extent, or like the accuracy, or whatever they're asking for the extent. Just make sure you specify that, because that's the actual question. I feel like that's such a little thing, but I would make that mistake in English as well. She has to bring it up again. Can you tell I was an English history student? I feel like it's really clear. I feel like it's a little obvious, but you want to make sure that you're specifying that everywhere you can. So let's look at structuring the essay. So you want to start with your thesis, which is one sentence, and it's your overall judgment. Now, don't worry if you can't get everything into the one sentence, because you're going to have this explanation after it anyways. You just want like a base judgment. So you want to pay attention to the verb and the phrasing at the beginning. So if it's a what extent, you want to make a judgment upon the extent to which something is true, or to whether it is true or not. And you want to make sure you're using clear and strong language such as highly or limited. And that's essential so that you make sure you're actually answering that question. A lot of the time in history, it will be a to what extent question, because they do like to use statements, but other times it'll be assess and evaluate. And it can be the other higher task words too. But I think just being aware that to what extent you really need to define and use that clear, assertive, highly extent or high extent, it's highly accurate, limited accuracy, just having those that strong vocabulary to make that judgment. Then you want an explanation, which is 2 to 3 sentences. So it's a clear or brief outline of the context of your judgment, why you've reached that judgment, but you also want brevity in that. So you don't want to get too much into the backstory of your essay. You just want to make sure that you're providing enough detail so it's clear what you're discussing. And then you want an outline of the essay, so what each paragraph is going to be about. And this is where you make it clear what type of essay you're writing. And then you're going to do your thesis restated. So in this part, this is where you'd be able to see if you're doing a differentiated essay, a thematic essay, or a factor essay. We're going to go through what those are. But that's where you'd be able to tell. And just like that differentiated essay that we saw before, in this outline of the essay is where you'd bring up, if you're doing a differentiated essay where you're like, yeah, this event was important, but these ones were actually more important, or these ones were just as important, that's where you'd bring up those other events. And then you're going to restate your thesis. So this is why I said, guys, starting every paragraph, your intro, your conclusion, and all your body paragraphs with your thesis, and ending it with a restatement or link to your thesis is the way to go. Let's look at this intro sample. So Soviet foreign policy was only partially successful in achieving its aims from 1917 to 1941. Thesis. Soviet foreign policy had fundamentally incompatible aims: domestic stability and international revolution, which greatly limited its accomplishments, as the success of one aim reduced the opportunity for the other. Though the aims and purposes of Soviet foreign policy fluctuated depending upon the current leadership and ideology of the Bolsheviks party, preservationist policies demonstrate that throughout the period, the Bolsheviks' aims of survival outweighed their desire to spread socialism. So that's very much like the explanation. This is evident through the various militaristic, strategic, economic, diplomatic, and social cultural factors that impacted or were impacted by Soviet foreign policy during the period. That's the outline of the essay, where you can tell, okay, these are going to be the different body paragraphs, which demonstrate the Bolsheviks' internal conflict between pragmatism and ideological adherence that contributed to its only partial success. Look at that, partial. So it's starting with a thesis, it's going into an explanation, it's got an outline of the essay, and then thesis restated, all in 139 words. Done, dusted, band 6, we're on it. We are on it. Now let's look at structuring paragraphs. So fun. So you want your judgment always going to be, guys, look, like it's here. You start with your judgment, you end with your judgment. You want your judgment to be one sentence, which is just a relationship of your thesis with the focus of your paragraph. So you're going to make sure that you link your original initial judgment to your focus of the paragraph. So let's say for this one, the judgment is so that Soviet foreign policy was only partially successful, and then you'd link that through its various militaristic and strategic factors. Done. And then that would be your judgment. Then you're going to explain your judgment and you're going to link it specifically to that particular paragraph. You want it to be simple and clear. The detail is where this comes in. So the beginning of the paragraphs, you want to be very straightforward and very clear. You also want to make sure when you're restating your initial thesis, don't like swish up the words. Like if you said partial here, or if you said limited in the beginning, use limited again. You don't want to switch up the words so you're not confusing lazy markers, but you're not just confusing markers in general, and you're just kind of sticking to your like genuine thesis. When you get to this part, which is the further explanation with examples, is where we're going to hop on it. We're going to hop on the wagon. This is where it really gets to the in-depth part. That's where you're going to explain and justify your judgment using historical examples to back up and solidify your argument. And it's literally just detail. Like it's detail, 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 the whole thing. You'll link back to your judgment in one sentence at the end. We're going to re-outline how the argument that you use prove your judgment and then restate your thesis. So we've got this question here where it's saying that it failed here, and we're going to go to the end. Therefore, the policy of Desante had failed and it's contributed to its overall failure. So already you can see just the importance of starting with the thesis and ending with the thesis judgment, but then linking that to the militaristic point. So if we look at the original thesis, Detente was a failure due to differing understandings both internationally and domestically of the various objectives of the policy. It still got that sense of failure that was developed in the original thesis, but in this beginning paragraph, it's got the link to the argument of that paragraph, which is the militaristic landscape. So that's how you kind of link, and it's not too hard to do. I think when it's harder said than done, but I think when you can visually see how it's done and how people are linking their thesis to their body paragraphs, it's a lot easier. So that's why I really believe in modern history, looking at exemplar essays and just reading past works, exemplar responses is so important. And I tried to put in quite a few in here just so you guys can actually see how it's done. Because me saying like, oh, start with your paragraph and end with it, and me saying, oh, make sure you join your thesis to your point, very easy to say, but I think to see it is something that I really valued when I was doing my HSC. And then when you look at it, it's got like 1 to 2 sentences explanation. And then straight away here, it's like all detailed. It's got all the different details. It's got quotes. It's got specific dates. It's got the specific nuclear weapons that they used. So again, I don't want you guys to think that the only detail you can use in modern history is just historian quotes, because historian quotes are of equal significance to the true terminology that was used at the time, or statistics and numbers and like all the stats as well, all on the same level. So don't think that it just has to be like historian quotes poured down your throat and you need to memorize like 50 historian quotes. It's not even like that. I think mixing different types of quotes is actually even better, because you're using historian quotes if you're using stats, if you've got like proper terminology and dates and the true names of events, even better, because then at least you're not like giving all like this is the only detail, here's all like the quote proof. It's history, so you can use other forms of detail and they are of equal significance. And then your conclusion is literally just writing your introduction backwards. Seriously, like that's it. Swap around the outline of your essay and the thesis of your thesis restated, and you're done. You're gonna just start with therefore blah blah blah. It is through these points, and then have like the outline of your essay where you look at the different factors, the different events that you looked at, and then restate your thesis. You're done. So let's look at a conclusion sample and how straight to the point it is. So here's this one. To what extent was Lenin a critical factor to the Bolshevik consolidation of power? So therefore, though the significant contributions made by Lenin in regards to the implementation of his early social and political reforms, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, the Civil War and War Communism, and the new economic policy, is evident that Lenin played a highly significant role within the period. Lenin, as the primary leader of the Bolshevik Party, underpinned through his leadership and ideology all actions and activity of the Bolshevik Party, exerting more influence than any other leader at the time, and you can see that's very much a judgment statement. Thus, Lenin was a highly critical factor to the Bolshevik consolidation of power. Done. And you can see, starts with thesis, ends with thesis, and all we've really done is brought in, here how I said, swap around the outline of your essay and your thesis. We've just brought out the outline of the essay and those points that we would have spoken about, higher up in the essay. So I hope that makes sense. What we're going to be covering next, Russia, guys. So if you guys aren't doing Russia, you are all good to leave. If you wanted to stay, we are looking at like Bolshevik ideology and much more of the introductory points of Russia. So they do come up and they are a base for the dictatorship point, but completely up to you. But yeah, if you guys are on your way, thanks for coming. You can leave any questions and I'll still be live in the chat. If you guys have any questions about the essay skills that we just looked at, please ask me. I'm happy to answer any questions, or just anything about modern HSC in general. Early entry, honestly, anything about year 12, I'm happy to have a chat there while I'm there. But yeah, if you are on your way, thanks for coming, guys. And to anyone who's watching the recording, if you're not doing Russia, thank you for attending. Let's look at Russia, guys. Let's look at Russia. So my tips for the Russian national study, I did Russia as well, which I'm sure you guys who are still watching did it. A deep understanding of ideology is a must if you want top marks. Now, I hate to say this because ideology, I really wasn't a fan of the point. It just kind of felt, just was kind of dragging, I felt. And anytime I saw ideology, I was like, no, like, I don't want to write ideology. But even if you're not doing an ideology essay, ideology naturally comes into every dot point of the syllabus. So I think that's why I really wanted to focus on it in this presentation. Just get the basics. It's not even like you need to know it inside out, but I used to think like, oh, Stalin was a communist, like communism. Like I was like, oh, ideology is communism. Like, and I thought that was enough. It's not enough. It can mean so many different things. So we're gonna look at that. For your Stalinism essays, you also need to make sure you show the development. So the thing is, with the Russia study, it's between this whole period. So you can't just say like, yeah, Stalin won the power struggle and then everything was under his control. It wasn't even like that. It was very much his power developed over time, and over time he just kept consolidating his control. Like, yes, he won the power struggle, but it wasn't like as soon as he won the power struggle, he was like, yep, complete control, totalitarianism. It closely resembled totalitarianism by the end of 1941. So a lot of the questions you'll be able to see in your essays, you can look at like the development towards that. And very rarely are you required to assess the ethics of communism. And I mean this as well in for the core as well. You're never really asked like the ethics of the history. Obviously, the ethics are lacking. It's very important that you keep an open mind. So issues are often a lot more nuanced than you might expect. So being able to consider and assess the pros and cons when they arise is important for developing a nuanced essay. And then you can treat social, political, and economic as separate. Just because it was positive economically doesn't mean that it didn't have negative social impacts. So you can look at like positive effects of collectivization or of industrialization, but then look at how negative that was socially. And just be, I feel like it's easy if you get too much into the ethics of it, of being like, oh, how am I going to argue that it was positive if it did all this stuff to people? But that's why you'd want to bring up the different factors. And I think writing factors or thematical essays are important, because you can look at, sometimes like it's great for the economy, and some of the things that Stalin did were great for the economy, but it came at the cost of humanity. Like, it literally came at the cost of humanity, and it's exactly the same with Hitler. So just as long as you're not falling into the trap of arguing that like commies suck, or like when looking at how they consolidated power, the consolidation and all of these topics have nothing to do with ethics, which sucks. The ethics come in like the social impacts, and that's where you can argue them. But yeah, it's hard because you learn a lot of this stuff, and especially in Russia, but in the Nazi regime, the core study as well, a lot of it is very heavy, and it's very unethical, like what you're learning about, especially socially and culturally. So it's hard to like keep that open mind. But you're not being assessed on that. So you can still have your beliefs and your opinions, but I think keeping an open mind and just making sure that you're separating that in your writing is very important for the study. Okay, let's look at the impact. Let's look at Bolshevik ideology. So at the base, let's look at it at a base. Let's look at it at an absolute base. At the base, communism is the brainchild of Karl Marx and Friedrich. Sorry, I don't even know how to say his name. And according to Nessa, communism is a theory or system of social organization promoting shared ownership of property and the means of production by the community as a whole or the state. Now, more important more important than that, I feel like, is just knowing the key features. And I feel like as soon as I felt more confident with the key features, it was easier to understand and apply the ideology a bit more. So there's the ideal of a classless society, promotion of equality, abolition of private property, not personal property. There was central planning for the big government, which involved redistribution of land, wealth, income, and resources. There was historical progress. They were far left on the political spectrum, and communism isn't homogeneous, so there's no one who hates communists more than other communists with slightly different interpretations of communism, which we're going to look at next, because there's so many different types and interpretations of communism, and we're about to look at that now. But I think that understanding the key features of the ideology is really important, because then you can directly connect those straight towards straight towards each dot point. I'm just bringing up, I've typed up some notes that I wanted to talk about specifically for this point, because there's so much in Russia. I want to have some points up that I can specifically talk to you guys about that I just thought were the most important. So this is the history of the class struggle, and it's believed that throughout time it's moved up to getting to that point of communism, which is essentially classless, but like, is it really? Is it really? Let's look at the variations of communist thought, and this is important because by kind of understanding the difference between orthodox Marxism, which is Menshevism, permanent revolution, and then socialism in one country, which was under Stalin, the power struggle, it all links to each other. Like, this is literally a big kind of foundation of the power struggle, even though it's a completely different point. So permanent revolution was the brainchild of Trotsky. It was adopted by Lenin as the official Bolshevik party policy, and it was this whole idea of international revolution, where Russian socialism couldn't exist within a capitalist world or continent, and instead it literally had to spread across all the rest of the world. And then they believed that as Russia was the weakest link in the chain, they had to support other socialist revolutions around the world. So it was combined and uneven development. So the peasantry and the proletariat are at different levels of development, where peasantry was very much at feudalism and proletariat class was at capitalism. So for both of them to transition, the peasantry had to have like this fast forward through capitalism, with the socialist proletariat as future inspiration. So it's kind of, it was very much, I think with Trotsky, the main thing you have to understand is that he was very big on this like international revolution, while Lenin's was the socialism in one country. So he's just, everyone has surely seen this picture of Stalin. We actually had this photo of Stalin up in our classroom. Like, we asked our teacher to put this photo up of him, just for context. This is so socialism in one country was the brainchild of Joseph Stalin, and it became the official Bolshevik party policy during the power struggle, especially when he won. So it was focused that right now Russia should focus on the development of socialism internally, and that would require adopting a policy of isolationism and increasing economic self-sufficiency. And when you look at that, this is why I mean that understanding the ideology is important, because it'll link to other points in the syllabus. The ideology and this idea of increasing economic self-sufficiency is important, because that literally links to the economic transformation. And that's why even if you're writing about the economic transformation, you can like one up your markers and like get some brownie points by linking back to ideology, which is always going to get marks. I feel like ideology is very much ignored in modern history because it is difficult to understand, and there's like a lot of facets and aspects to it. But that's by linking back to it and by showing good knowledge of that, we're getting brownie points. We're standing out in the marking center. And it responded to many of the concerns post-war Russian citizens had with permanent revolution. So that idea was that like international revolution would require more conflict, was like a big nope. While socialism in one country preyed on growing sense of nationalism, and it portrayed Russia as capable and strong enough to do it on its own. But these ideological differences were key to the power struggle, and were also key to his consolidation of power, and why Stalin was doing the things that he was doing and why he believed it. A lot of the successes that you can see in collectivization and of industrialization are a direct result on like the sense of nationalism and this whole idea of being able to depict Russia as being capable and strong enough to do it on their own. And he was very big on that idea of nationalism and just focusing on the internal, while Trotsky was much bigger on the international. Let's take this Mr. Worldwide. Let's look at theory and praxis, which I didn't learn about until very late into year 12, but I wish I learned about it more. Theory is the foundations of the ideology. So theory is like the Communist Manifesto. So it's like the actual foundation, is kind of that concrete, while praxis is the practical application of the theoretical ideas. So that's putting that ideology and that theory into action. And you can say that with like the 1917 revolution. The communist theory failed to acknowledge the needs conditions of post-1917 Soviet society, which you can see through World War One, the lack of industrialization, uneven development, and the Civil War. So because of that, strict ideological adherence is often sacrificed or even temporarily withdrawn in order to better suit society's short-term needs, which is where you see the new economic policy, which is literally completely against the like the theory and the praxis, but it's going completely against it. So it actually represented a betrayal of the revolution and the Marxist communism theory, and it steered away from socialism and communism and was staying stagnant on capitalism. So how is that like how does that work? So that's why I think that understanding how some of that sometimes being so strictly adherent to the ideology has to be sacrificed for the short term in those emergencies, especially after war communism, because the Bolsheviks needed to save their reputation when so many people had starved under war communism in 1918. But yeah, that's just how I think having just a basic understanding of, again, where they were coming from on each side, and especially for the power struggle, understanding the differences in Trotsky and Stalin's ideology and how they approached this idea of communism is so important. And again, when you look at it, like a lot of the time it's easy to be like, oh, Bolshevik ideology is just communism, but when you're actually looking at them, both of them are looking at, well, Trotsky's looking at feudalism and capitalism. What's his name? Stalin's looking more at socialism. Like it's all, even though it's communism, this is why I think it's important to understand the ideology. It's very much pushed that like, oh, Russia's communist and like communist. But when you actually look at it in detail, they're actually trying to build up to that facet of communism through these three. So understanding that is really going to make a difference in your marks, and it's going to come across in all different in points in the social and political transformation, in the economic transformation, in the power struggle. It'll come up across different points. Okay, so for early and social political reforms, there were the land decrees, which was redistribution of land away from the aristocracy and towards the peasantry and proletariat. Guys, I'm really sorry. In line with communist theory, I've been talking for nearly 2 hours now. It's going. And then there's also the worker decrees, which was 8-hour working days, uninterrupted period of 36 hours rest, which was the weekend. And then they were on social insurance and restructuring the workplace hierarchies. So I think when you're looking at the 8-hour working days, that's very much where you can look, and what I was talking before about ethics, where you can look at the working conditions and how strict they were. Socially, that was negative, but economically, that led to such high levels of productivity, which benefited their economy. So economically, that's a good thing, but socially, it's a bad thing. And that's why I think having that like open-minded view where sometimes it has to come with the sacrifice, and that doesn't mean that it's right, but in the context of like modern history and what you're writing about, it's what you'd want to argue. And then there's the self-determination of Russian occupied nations, which was also in line with the communist theory. So Lenin believed that nationalism and the concept of like nationhood as a whole split the international proletariat, which made them easier for the bourgeoisies to control and envision a borderless world. So then Lenin was staunchly like anti-imperialism, and like most communists were. And then when you look at women's rights, they were very much in line with communist theory. So Lenin believed that women were an integral part of the revolution, and he actually made divorce easier to obtain, especially in the case of domestic violence, and he also legalized abortion. And then we've got this quote. Our demands are practical conclusions, which we have drawn from burning needs, the shameful humiliation of women in bourgeoisie society, defenseless and without rights. And that very much links to this idea of communism and this classless society and the promotion of equality. So that very much links, and that's how you can see that women's rights, especially like at least under Lenin, were very much in line with communist theories. Now, when you're looking at other social and political reforms, censorship was also in line with communist theories. So the decree on the press gave the Soviet government the ability to shut down the papers, which was advocating opposition. Then the secret police, kind of in line with the communist theories. So thousands, including members of the proletariat, were persecuted, tortured, and killed by the Cheka, accused of such crimes as being Tsars, counter-revolutionaries, kulaks, and black marketers. Marketeers. And then the social and political reforms overall were in line with the communist theory. So if you were to get a question on that, that's usually the judgments that's being made. But it's because it was the pragmatic thing for the Bolsheviks to do. They'd promised socialist reform before they came to power, and they had made pretty good of those promises. So we've got these quotes from AJP Taylor. They needed to prove they were more capable than the provisional government, who had no popular mandate and little popular support. So at this stage, socialism was quite popular, and the majority of the reforms positively impacted masses. So we've got this quote from Sunny: "They placed at the head of a genuinely popular movement, and the flimsy fabric of Bolshevik power rested entirely on popular support of key sectors of the population." And when you're going across it, you've got popular support from women, popular support from workers, and on self-determination as well. So it's just all working. Now, when we're looking at the treaty, which I feel like really came up in the essay question, so I hope you guys, even, I know I put exemplars, but I was trying to think ahead with the exemplars that I was putting in. So like I said, you guys can download the slides, but if you wanted to use some of the points, I put in exemplars from a lot from Russia, so you guys can literally take statistics and take quotes and take points. I had quite some work on the treaty as well. And this is all got to do with how much in line it was with the permanent revolution. Again, you can download all these notes. So if you wanted to download these slides and just add some of these points to your own notes or use them to start writing your notes, I definitely recommend. Trotsky had this idea of like neither peace nor war, which was very much in line with the idea of permanent revolution. It relied on an impending German revolution, which was to hold off signing the treaty. He thought that signing the treaty would stabilize Germany, and the conditions weren't as conducive with the socialist revolution. And instead, he initially accepted, because he was the Commissar of Foreign Affairs, but then that failed when the Germans invaded Russia during the armistice. So didn't really help. Then Lenin had this whole idea of yield space, gain time, which also relied on impending German revolution, but he had a different conclusion that, if we sign the treaty, we'll just deal with the concessions for a while, but then everything will get back as soon as a socialist government in Germany grew. But no matter what, they were out of World War I, which was like the most pressing concern. And then they eventually accepted it after the German invasion, and that led to Lenin actually threatening to resign. And then Bukharin had this idea of revolutionary war, which was also in line with the permanent revolution, which was stay in the war and try to transform it into an imperialist war, to a class war, where you're like radicalizing the soldiers from Germany, Britain, and France, and banding them together to turn on army generals and officials, and then eventually on the bourgeoisie state. When you're looking across these three, and we're going to go through the other perspectives as well, I think you can see why Lenin was so popular, and Lenin was really loved in Russia, and that's why Stalin had such an obsession with like literally being all up on Lenin and trying to like act like his best friend, literally editing photos and like editing out what Lenin truly believes about him. But Lenin, for a lot of Russian people, their big thing was, we just want to get out of World War I. Like, we were really suffering. It's absolute rock bottom. Please get us out. And you can see that Lenin, his like most pressing concern was, let's just get out of World War I. So his was very pragmatic. So even though it was in line with the permanent revolution, it was very pragmatic to just get them out. And I think that really proves why he had such popular support. Now, when you're looking at Trotsky, and his idea of the civil war, it was very much in line with communist ideology. So Trotsky toured the battle lines by train and equipped it with his own printing press. One thing that you can really recognized in even in the power struggle across Trotsky and Stalin, is that Trotsky was very much on the battle line. Like, he was on trains, he was going around, he was with the soldiers because of his role. Stalin spent a lot more time with the people and a lot more time in the government. And I think spending that time with the people really helped him build that image of who he was, while Trotsky was always like away, never to be seen, not really like a people's man. And that very much led to the result of the power struggle as well. He capitalized on revolutionary fever and uniting influence on communism to encourage support for the Red Army over the capitalist or imperialist whites. And then we've got a quote here. I wanted to just add in some historian quotes because I know that they're hard to find sometimes. So I thought if any of you guys are downloading slides, you can just take them. They're specific ones. So that led to the appointment of 50,000 ex-Tsarist officers, which broke ideology, but it was pragmatic, because many Bolsheviks were like, oh, we're literally working with the enemy, and they disapproved of it. But that meant that there was military expertise to the Red Army, and the Red Army was really lacking at that point. So it was actually quite a smart thing to do. And then there was also the reinstating rank and class in the Red Army, which again breaks the ideology, but it was pragmatic. So I hope you can see with this point, and that's why I really wanted to bring them up, that ideology, it wasn't even like there was this super strict at all times was ideology being applied. A lot of the times it was, um but at times, because they had to be pragmatic and because there were these emergencies, they had to break it and they had to like prioritize being pragmatic. So I wanted to just bring that up in ideology because I feel like, I don't know, even when I was doing modern, I very much was like, okay, um Russia was communist, everything they had to do had to align with communism, but there's a lot of contradictions to that. And as you're going throughout the syllabus and what you're seeing with like the consolidation and development of power, so I wanted to bring that up just so you guys can notice that difference, and I think that's an important part of ideology. So that was bringing back the different ranks and classes in the army. But again, when you look at communism, there's that whole idea of like a classless, like utopia, and there's like no class. So how are you going to bring classes into the army? Like, how does that work? So that shows that the ideology was broken, but pragmatically that was necessary for organizational purposes, because it was nearly impossible to coordinate the Red Army with how many, like, with the numbers that there were without that. So you can see how they had to be pragmatic. That meant breaking the ideology, but it's kind of necessary. Kind of necessary. And then when you look at war communism, it's Russia's extreme form of total war was the mixiest of mixed bags. We've got this quote. They underwent a process of widespread nationalization and the process of transforming private assets into public assets. And it had a reversal of many early social and political reforms, such as workers' reforms, but it wasn't in line with the communist theory at all, because the proletariat experienced grueling long working days in awful conditions. I just have some quick notes that I wanted to tell you guys here. During war communism, which was introduced in 1918, over 70% of Russia's industrial capacity was geared to war. So adjusting production led to many difficulties for factories, and that led to large factory closures and redundancies. Workers were leaving city to return. The urban workforce decreased from 3.6 million to 1.4 million between 1912 and 1919. Urban people starved because of the harvest, and there was increased price of grain. It just wasn't a good time. It wasn't a good time, and they were so desperate to save their reputation, the Bolsheviks, that the new economic policy was kind of like the only thing that they could have done. This is where they reintroduced capitalist elements into the economy. So again, it's completely going against ideology, but they were so desperate that they kind of had to betray the revolution and communist theory. This is where grain requisitioning was abolished, the worker hour was shortened, trade unions were given limited but some freedom to operate, peasants were given the ability to trade, make a profit. Russia didn't become a capitalist country, because the commanding heights of the economy were still in the hands of the state, but they were still very much along those lines of capitalism. But it was extremely controversial within the party, because some members saw it as pragmatic and temporary retreat from socialism as a betrayal. So they really saw it as a betrayal. And here we've got this quote from a Bolshevik member: the NEP restored some prosperity to Russia, but to many of us, this prosperity was distasteful. And that's because it was a betrayal against the little foundation of the communist theory. So I don't want to go too in onto that, but I thought that to look at, I really wanted to focus especially on the skills for short answers and essays, because those are game changers. Those are going to affect like 100% of your exam. While Russia, not all of you guys are doing it. If you guys are saying it's here, I think that this point of ideology, like ideology is very quickly taught in the early dot points and like very high up, but then it's hard to make the links after. And it, I don't know, I just got a bit confused with Russia because, like I said, I thought like, oh, it's all communism, and then it's going capitalist, but then it's going back to socialism, but then it's like, oh, we got to bring the peasants from feudalism. Like it's like moving everything around, and it was dealing with so many different classes. So I wanted to really, really specify this point. Lenin argued it was a one step backwards, two steps forward solution. So for Lenin, the Bolsheviks had to show the peasants that they could and would quickly change their policies to alleviate their want. It was very pragmatic, so it allowed the Bolsheviks to regain some of the proletariat trust after the Civil War and reinvigorate their economy that was on the verge of collapse because of war communism. Great job, guys. And Russia wasn't in the condition to introduce socialism because it was limited. It had like a limited industry and a weak deficit economy. So they needed to reach this stage first before they could implement the ideology effectively. So they couldn't actually, unless they did the NEP and unless they brought in that sense of capitalism, they weren't actually going to get to socialism and then eventually to that communist utopia without it. So even though it wasn't in line with communist ideology, it was that step forward towards it. And that's why Lenin argued that it was one step backwards, but it was also two steps forwards towards it. Now, when we're looking at the power struggle, which I really recommend knowing, I think the power struggle is one of the best points that you can really focus on. I feel like it comes up in a lot of papers, and it just, even if you're not writing about the power struggle, if you're talking about the transformation, if you're talking about ideology, like it's just one of those points that pervades all of the kind of syllabus. So I think it's really important understanding it. We've got this quote: the leadership conflict was a radical struggle between permanent revolution and socialism in one country. And that's why I think having that, those first slides that we looked at on Trotsky's permanent revolution idea and the socialism in one country, I think understanding the difference, that's generally the basis of the power struggle. So understanding that is really, really important. Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution had been the dominant ideological platform of the Bolshevik Party since 1917, but support was waning. After World War I and the Civil War, the Russian populace desired peace and stability, and he was still very much on that, while permanent revolution had this emphasis on international revolution, which is just going to require more conflict. Everyone's tired of it after World War I and the Civil War. They just want peace. They just want to be secure. They just want to like chill out. And Trotsky's out here like, no, let's go. You know what? Let's not even stop here. Let's go conflict international. Let's take it worldwide. Let's literally take it worldwide. So a lot of the people aren't going to support that. And an international revolution also seemed very unlikely when capitalism appeared to be thriving. A Soviet-style revolution in the UK or even the US was a pipe dream. So at the time, like it didn't even make sense when they were, especially with the NEP, and they're using capitalism, and capitalism is genuinely restoring prosperity in their country. How is he going to go and he's going to be like, you know what, let's bring communism worldwide. Let's take it worldwide. Like that doesn't even add up if they're not even doing it in their own country yet. So that was how like the Russian population wasn't really the biggest fan of Trotsky. And like I said, he was always on the road, he was always on the battlefield, very much to do with the war and his commissar position. So it wasn't happening in that sense. While Stalin's socialism in one country, where communist efforts are concentrated in the Soviet Union, were more pragmatic, and they instilled nationalism, because you can also see it as a direct response to the failings of Trotsky. He was very politically cunning. Like, man knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. He finessed the system so hard, like in the power struggle. But he was very much able to increase his support because he aligned his ideology with Lenin. Even though Lenin literally supported the permanent revolution, he died. So he was much more focusing on like what Lenin was promoting in public. And Stalin exaggerated the differences in ideology between Lenin and Trotsky by bringing up old disagreements, which were pre-1917, along with Trotsky's brief Menshevik past. So he was capitalizing off them and their disagreements to make himself look better, and that's why he was quite the cunning guy. It was considered a revolution from above, because it was bureaucratic bureaucratic. I'm forgetting how to speak English. It's nearly 2 hours, guys. Where the small group of state officials, which was from the Politburo, made most of the important decisions. Rather than the masses agitating for revolution and social change, Stalin made those decisions for them. So that the idea of collectivization, and then through that, the cult of personality started, and he was able to like abuse and develop that. So the Soviet state under Stalin was very much under that. Collectivization, industrialization are such key, like every point in the syllabus is important, but I feel like power struggle, economic transformation, and political and social transformation are really, really big ones, because that's the big picture. Um, that was just a reversal of the new economic policy, honestly, where they had the production targets. I wanted to add in some quotes for you. But by 1937, pretty much everyone was an employee of the state. He achieved his goals. Guys, that brings us to the end of the lecture. I'm sorry I had to fly through that Russia content at the end, but my main thing for Russia was I really wanted to focus on just the ideology and how they intended to strictly adhere to it, but a lot of the times they had to break away from it and turn to pragmatism instead. I wish you guys so much luck in modern history. The fact that you guys even came to this lecture, or if you're watching it after, you're watching a recording, downloading the slides, whatever, is so good. You're really taking that step ahead with your work. But yeah, good luck in the subject. Like I said, I am creating the content for the TikTok, so I'm looking to do quite a few like modern videos and kind of just like 1 minute summaries of like a dot point. So follow us if you're on TikTok and if you're interested. But otherwise, have a great day, guys. Thanks.